everybody. Thanks for being here with us this morning. My name is Katie Earl, and I'm the coordinator of our University Express program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. And we're joined here today with Lisa Matthias-Wiza. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Lisa's with our Department of Environment and Planning, which you'll learn about when I read her bio to you. But before we get to that, we've got some new folks, so I'm just going to breeze through our normal housekeeping quickly. We are recording the session, and if all goes as planned, we'll try to post it on the website in the near future. And if you have any questions for Lisa as she goes through her presentation, type those in your Q&A panel, and we can do questions throughout, or at the end, really whatever we have time for and whatever comes in. If you're new to us, your Q&A panel is located on the lower right-hand side of your screen if you're on a computer. Click on that, expand it, and send your questions to me. If you're on a tablet or smartphone, touch your screen. That brings up your control panel. Then click on that button with 3 dots, and there you'll see your Q&A. So we hope you participate with us. I'd like to thank our sponsors, which is my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Cellular Orthopedics, and Wegmans for their support. And Senior Services is at 858-8526 if you ever need anything. Excuse me. All right, so our star of the show. Lisa Matthias-Wiza has worked in the geographic information and mapping field locally for over 20 years. She has a master's in geographic information systems, also known as GIS, from UB and a bachelor's in environmental science from Alfred University. She taught GIS at Erie Community College and works for the Erie County as their director of the Office of Geographic Information Services. Lisa is an avid quilter, an okay volleyball player, and bicyclist, and while hiking has indeed gotten lost in the woods. Lisa and her husband reside in Williamsville, and I'm so happy to learn from her. Lisa, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for doing this, and I'm really excited to be here. And just wanted to mention that the whole purpose of me even doing a talk like this entitled "Where on Earth Am I?" is because I have asked that question many times as I've been road tripping, as I've been hiking, as I've been bicycling. And I thought, you know, it would be really, really beneficial for me to understand the technology that we are relying more and more on. And I thought if it would be helpful to me, it could be helpful to other people as well. So just a little disclaimer too, I have, while I do know a bit about global positioning systems and how GPS units work, and how they do provide us with locational information, I am much less savvy on how cell phones work and how cell phones do that. The technology is changing all the time. It's really pretty incredible how vast and extensive this technology is and how much we are kind of blindly relying on it. The other purpose of this presentation for me was so that I could learn a little bit more about this and understand kind of where that technology is today. So this is the very first webinar I have ever given in this format. So I'm going to be relying on Katie quite a bit. If questions do come up, I absolutely encourage questions, and I kind of want us all to learn this technology at the same time. So please feel free to ask questions as I go along. I don't mind being interrupted. We'll see what Katie thinks about that as well. So we'll just go with the flow on this. And just to give you a bit more about what I do and what my role at Erie County is, I am the director of the Office of Geographic Information Systems. It's a bit of a mouthful, but really all that means is myself and my colleague, there's 2 of us in the office, we are responsible for providing maps, mapping data, GPS technology, and also online mapping sites for the county. And we do have some public-facing online mapping sites that we have developed. Can I take a second to go through those? I know that those of you that are on the phone aren't going to be able to see these, but I just want to give you just a quick example of some of the work that I do so that you understand the context of where I'm coming from a little bit with this. So I'm just going to drag over one of the maps that our department puts together. This is our tax parcel mapping system that is a public facing site. So you can access this website anytime. And what this does is show parcel data for all of Erie County. And we update this, I'd say about once a year with updated parcel data. The other map that I wanted to show you here is the COVID dashboard that we have put together in response to the COVID pandemic. And this is a map that we keep updated, map and a dashboard that we keep updated about every other day. You can see it was last updated on June 14th. And this COVID dashboard shows you the number of confirmed cases by municipality, number of confirmed COVID cases by zip code. And thankfully, we've got vaccination percentages going here as well. So another public facing website, something that we do update, like I said, pretty regularly based on Department of Health information. So we encourage you to utilize that. And then I'm just going to show you one more, which is our parks website. So we work with our county parks department quite a bit to do maps and mapping. We do trail mapping with them. We use GPS technology to map out trails and signage along trails. But this is one of our public facing websites that shows you the locations of all the Erie County parks and forests within Erie County. And the neat thing about this is you can type in an address. So you could type in your address. And when that address pops up, it'll show you how many parks and forests that are owned by the county are within, I've got a 10-mile radius showing here. And you can increase that radius if you wanted to as well. So just an example of some of the projects that we're working on in Erie County. We do maps for municipalities as well throughout Erie County, and we do support other departments within the county. So we do quite a bit of work with Department of Public Works, like I said, real property, environment and planning, and now with COVID, we're doing a lot of work with our Department of Health as well. So in addition to those, I do like to quilt and I do like to play volleyball. And the weather was terrible for volleyball last night, but we were out there getting soaked. And for no good reason, we lost our games, but that's okay. So what I really wanted to talk about today, right, is these global positioning systems that we're relying on in vehicles, on our phones, even handheld GPS receivers. How do those work? And then how do cell phones work in terms of finding locations and knowing where their locations are? The technology, as I mentioned, is changing every day. But I'll go through and give you the best info that I've got. And again, if anyone has some questions, please feel free to ask. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm used to doing presentations in person, so to be talking to my computer screen is a little different for me. So it doesn't react quite the way a regular audience does. So, okay, to get started, where on earth am I? As the screen is showing, you are here. That's all we need to know, right? Presentation done. But if we really wanted to delve into this a little bit more, and again, I've got my little intro slides on there. The first thing I want to talk about is global positioning systems just on their own. I don't want to talk about cell phones to start with. We'll get into that in the next part of this presentation, but just right out of the gate, what is a global positioning system and how does it work? Really important to understand this technology if you're interested in locational information, because this is really the basis of how accurate locational information is provided. And it's actually pretty fascinating how it works. So a global positioning system is based on orbiting navigational satellites that are orbiting around the Earth all the time, 24/7. In order to access the locational information that is provided by these satellites, you do need some form of a GPS receiver. GPS receivers back in the 90s and even early 2000s would have been a handheld GPS receiver that did nothing else but provide you with that locational information coming from satellites. These days, that's changing. You can get a GPS receiver in the form of a watch. You can get a GPS receiver that connects to your cell phone. But the heart of this technology is there's a constellation of satellites that are continuously orbiting around the Earth, and you or a GPS receiver can access those satellites and determine location based on a transmittal of time information. In addition to locational information, a GPS receiver can then also tell you altitude. It can then also tell you velocity if you're traveling in a vehicle and you're using a GPS unit. It can tell you direction and distance to destination. So once it can pinpoint location, you do have these other characteristics of your location that it can map. I don't know if you've ever been in a car that has a GPS unit in it, and that GPS unit does tell you velocity or your speed. I know when I've been driving with my husband and I have my GPS unit next to me, I'm going, you're going 83 miles an hour according to the GPS when you're supposed to be going 70, you know? So it can get a little annoying, but it's fascinating technology. So really at the crux of global positioning systems is accurate timing. Okay, the timing is the key to measuring the distance to satellites. If you know how long it takes for a signal, and these are radio signals that go from a satellite to a GPS receiver, if you know the time it takes for a signal that's traveling at the speed of light to get from the satellite to the receiver, you can determine the distance that was. Multiply the travel time by the speed of light. Now you've got your distance. Yes, that's simplified, but that's really the basics of how these GPS receivers work. It's based on travel time. You do need 4 satellites in order to lock in a location. So if you have a GPS receiver that's maybe only picking up 1 or 2 satellites, you're not going to be able to pinpoint your location. You need to have at least 4. Every GPS satellite that's orbiting the Earth has 4 atomic clocks on it. And I put on here that they're about $100,000 each. They're not cheap, but those clocks, those atomic clocks are responsible for measuring absolute accurate time so that travel time can be used to calculate distance. So as I mentioned before, once you have locked in a minimum of 4 satellites on a GPS receiver, you can then start to calculate other things like direction, speed, trip distance, and destination, or travel time to a destination. So I've got a slide up here that kind of shows you how that works. Basically, first step is every satellite within the GPS constellation that's orbiting the Earth has to broadcast a radio signal with its location. That radio signal is then picked up by a GPS receiver, again, is traveling at the speed of light. The GPS device receives those radio signals, notes the exact time of their arrival, and uses that to calculate its distance to each satellite. So amazing amount of math involved in this, but not really the most complicated of math in order to do this. So it's really a fascinating system. Once a GPS receiver knows its distance from at least 4 satellites, it can use geometry to find its exact location on Earth. I would love for this kind of stuff to be taught in high school math classes. I don't know if it is, but I think it's the most interesting thing that this is, again, this is happening continuously as you use a GPS receiver for a location. That process of looking at, of locking in 4 satellite locations on a GPS is called trilateration. So it's not triangulation. Some of you may have heard of that, went, okay, I know you've got to triangulate to get a location. This is called trilateration, which is a mathematical technique to determine a GPS receiver position, and then again, speed, and then you can also do the vertical, you can also do elevation with it. So I have a slide here that's just showing with trilateration, we've got spheres that are drawn around each of the satellites in the graphic. And basically what this is showing is in just a few minutes, you turn on a GPS receiver. Again, cell phones are starting to use this technology. In just a few minutes, what happens is a GPS receiver can lock in on a satellite, narrow its position down to a large area on the Earth's surface. It'll lock in a second satellite, narrows the position to a region where those 2 spheres will overlap. It can then lock in a third position, get you pretty accurately to a pinpointed location. And then when it can lock in a fourth, that will enhance the precision and also the ability to determine elevation. So it's really 4 separate satellites that you need to lock into in order to get your accurate position and elevation. Okay, so who actually is doing this and who's running this, right? So I'm talking about these satellites that are orbiting the Earth, and we've got these GPS receivers that are trying to lock into those in order to get us a position, and we're relying on this technology. Where did this start, and who is maintaining this system? Global positioning systems in the United States, they're maintained by the Department of Defense. They were originally set up, and this technology was originally established as a result of the nuclear arms race during the Cold War. We really wanted to have positional information, accurate positional information available to the military. So the very first satellites launched specifically for global positioning systems, first satellite was launched in 1978. Now, again, I mentioned you need to have at least 4 to get an accurate position. You need to have working satellites. You've got to make sure you've got a constellation of satellites so that you can pinpoint a location anywhere in the world. So these satellites need to be orbiting equally spaced. So our system in the United States did not become fully operational until April 1995. That's when it was declared an operational GPS system, where you could take a GPS receiver. There weren't many available to the public at that time, but you could take a GPS receiver and find your location. The result of getting all those satellites, and there were 24 at the time, getting those 24 satellites orbiting the Earth properly in 1995 was called the Navstar GPS network. All told, overall, it cost Department of Defense about $13 billion to get that underway. So it was called the Navstar program, Navigational Signal Timing and Ranging Global Positioning System. Today, the United States simply calls it the GPS system. So GPS is a generic term for a global positioning system, but it's also the United States name of their constellation of satellites and our technology for locating features. So our system in the United States is managed by the U.S. Space Force. So U.S. Space Force was created in 2019. So before that, this was originally run, the Global Positioning Satellite System was originally run by the U.S. Air Force, the 50th Space Wing, They're located in Colorado in the at the Schriever Air Force Base. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind, that global positioning systems, when you're turning on a GPS unit, using this data or using this technology for locational information, it's run by the military. It is a free service that's available to anyone worldwide that can read satellites, or US satellites, I should say. So who else besides the United States has a GPS system of satellites? Is it just the US? You know, I had mentioned that ours, the United States system, went into effect and became functional in 1995. There are other countries and the European Union that are attempting to get GPS satellite constellations in orbit of the United States, of the Earth, so that they can have their own GPS systems. The first country that was able to do that after the United States was Russia. They have a system that's called GLONASS, and they have a fully operational system. If you were to purchase a GPS unit these days, at our job here at the county, I've had to purchase a couple GPS units. All of them can read GLONASS satellites. All of them can read Russian satellites. So I had mentioned we want to be able to get to the point where we can lock in 4 satellite locations. These days, when I use a GPS unit, I can usually get a minimum of 8 to 12, because we're also reading Russian satellites in addition to the US GPS system. China is really on its way to getting global coverage. European Union is as well. Their system's called Galileo. India is on its way to have an operational system in 2021, and Japan is as well. Again, the only other functional orbiting system of satellites specific for GPS is Russia and the United States. And again, I find this stuff so fascinating because of how we take this technology for granted, that in a lot of other countries, they're still attempting to get a functional system underway. That doesn't mean they can't use GPS receivers that can read GLONASS and GPS satellites. So throughout the world, you do have access, and there are agreements between countries so that GPS satellites can be used for locational information in countries other than the United States. But we were the first. So with that said, can error be added purposely to the GPS accuracy? So can countries put an error into the signal that's being received by GPS receiver? Absolutely, and it has been done, and it was done by the United States. It was a program that was called selective availability. So I had mentioned that in the United States, our system went operational in 1995. When it went operational, civilian use had an error and intentional degradation added to it. So public GPS signals were off by I believe about 10 meters. I was actually working in this field at the time. So we were using GPS units for some kind of mapping and tracking, but we really didn't use them a lot because of the inherent error that was in them. So the US degraded the signals of GPS satellites until May 2000. And it was in May of 2000 when the president stopped that. So we discontinued the use of selective availability in order to make GPS more responsive to civil and commercial users. And, you know, I mentioned I was working in this field in 1995. I was working in this field in May of 2000. And it was a big deal for us when selective availability was removed from GPS units, and we were able to get a much better, more detailed location from our GPS units. So civilian users can currently use GPS receivers without any restrictions on them. Could that change? The United States says it would never do that again, but that doesn't mean that isn't available, and it doesn't mean that other countries can't do that. So it's something that I like to keep in mind when I'm using my GPS unit, that, okay, this is the signal that I'm getting now. This could always have an inherent error put into it. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I did want to talk about the three components of a GPS, just so that you understand all the different components that are involved in your GPS receiver or your cell phone finding its location based on GPS. There's a space segment, and let's talk about that. That space segment is really all of the satellites that are involved in sharing their location through radio signals to a GPS receiver. So there are 24 always in use. They pass over one spot every 12 hours. These are all my fun facts about these satellites. They work on solar power, right? So that's what the big panels are for them. They do have the atomic clocks on them, and they have a lifespan of about 10 years. Typically, from any point on Earth, there are 5 to 8 of these satellites visible. So we're at the point now where using a GPS receiver, we don't have that selective availability anymore that has the error in it, that you're almost from any point on Earth, you're going to be able to access a minimum of those 4, and probably more you'll be able to see satellites, and there's not going to be inherent error with them. Okay. What else do we have here? Here's my slide that shows the US satellite constellation. So the one point that I want to make on this slide is this is a list of the operational satellites and the different types of satellites that are in play right now for GPS use in the United States. And the thing that I wanted to note is 8 of them were launched between 97 and 04. 7 of them were launched between 05 and 2009. So the system is, continuously being updated. These satellites are continuously being launched, and especially by other countries too. But for the United States, next one here, 12 operational satellites were launched between 2010 and 2016. And now the newest, the latest and greatest type of satellite used for this was first launched in 2018. And the point I want to make here is they're saying that there is no selective availability technology on there. So there's no way to kind of degrade that signal that's coming in. Can we believe that? I don't know. I'd like to think so. I like to think that's true. So these are the US satellites that are orbiting right now. And then my question was, can we see these? Is there a map of these? And the answer is yes. And so I have this map I'm going to drag over. This is a map of actually all the satellites that are orbiting the Earth at any given time. So you can see at the bottom, this is showing us 19,236 satellites. We can zoom in on this map. I can come over to the United States and kind of show where we're located. I got us a little, yeah, here's one. Here's a guy that we could track right now. He's going over the Finger Lakes. But on this map, I'm going to zoom out, and we can filter to show these are US satellites. And again, these are not just GPS satellites. These are all satellites that are orbiting the Earth. So I filtered on the United States ones. There's 6,214. I can just show the GPS satellites as well. And this is, they're highlighting in red. They're a little bit more difficult to see because there's only a few of them. Again, there's like between 24 and 31 of them. But these are the US GPS satellites. So I can click on one of these, it shows us the orbit. And then I can click on a link that takes us to the information that's specific to that. And of course, this one's showing a bit of an error on it, but that's what happens in presentations, right? So I wanted you to be aware that that map exists out there in the world. Next part of this is the control segment. So who's controlling this and where are these satellites being controlled? Again, I mentioned that these satellites are launched and maintained by the US Space Force or the Air Force. They're headed up at the Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado. But the United States also has these other locations that are responsible for maintaining those satellites in orbit. So there are 16 monitoring stations dotted throughout the world, 11 ground antennas that are continuously reading information from those satellites, making sure they're working. And there's an alternate control station, just so the United States has a backup location for where these are maintained, and that's in the Vandenberg Air Force Base in Colorado. So it's in California. So it's in Colorado and California where the United States GPS satellite constellations are maintained and tracked. Let me get back on the screen here. The last segment of using GPS is the public or the receiver portion of this. You need to have a receiver to actually access that locational information. So the slide I have here is just showing you the private companies that create GPS receivers for us. And the main ones are Motorola, Garmin, Rand McNally, Land Air Sea Systems. These are some of the main ones. And then when you think about how GPS is being used, how this locational information is being used, it's used for navigation. It's used for tracking objects, but also people. It's being used for tracking workers. It's used for mapping, and it's used for timing, for precise timing. So in addition to finding an accurate position, it's used for all these other industries and all these other uses. So agriculture, aviation, environment. You know, we're relying on this technology more and more. And then in terms of how accurate the GPS signal is, out of the gate, it really depends if you are civilian or if you're military. Again, this is a military-based system. So really two different radio bands that travel to the Earth from these satellites. The first radio band is on an L1 frequency, and that's the civilian one. So the accuracy is 20 to 30 feet. The military band is much more accurate, to about 1 centimeter accuracy. So I mentioned that the civilian GPS accuracy is about 20 to 30 feet. There are now additional ways that we can make that signal even more accurate. And that's what a lot of survey companies are doing. That's what aviation is doing. So the data that's coming straight from these satellites can be post-processed to be made more accurate. Their signal can be averaged over an amount of time to make it a little bit more accurate. Or there are what's called augmentation systems that are kind of built on top of that satellite system that are used to make the signal more accurate. So two augmentation systems that are very common, both of them are available to the public for free. One is through NOAA. It's called CORS, which is a continuously operated reference system. And one is called WAS, Wide Area Augmentation System. And the WAS system was actually created by FAA, became operational in 2004. And the purpose of it is to provide additional locational information from additional satellites that work in time with the satellites of the GPS system to provide real-time GPS signal corrections and to monitor the GPS data. So I've got a map on the screen here that shows, this is only available on North America. It is available for free, but this map shows the locations of the Wasp augmentation system that works in conjunction with the satellites that are orbiting the Earth for GPS. So on average, this will bump up accuracy better than 3 meters 95% of the time. If you purchase a GPS unit these days, all of them say they're WAS enabled. This has become a standard now. And then the other augmentation system that's become very common is what's called CORS, or the Continuously Operating Reference Station System. So these stations are dotted all over the United States. Their whole purpose is just to continuously map or locate themselves based on the GPS satellite system. And if there's any error in its known location, it can apply that error to your GPS unit automatically. With the core system, you can get centimeter level correction. So again, this is free and available only in North America. The map shows that there are about 3 locations in our area in Western New York that have these beacons that are continuously reading GPS signals. All right, so I know I used a lot of time there to talk about GPS, but if anyone has any questions specifically on that technology, I'm happy to kind of take a breather here and talk about it. I know it's a lot of info.
It's amazing information, Lisa. Thank you for that. Holy cow.
I know,
Okay,
I
so
know my head's about to explode, I'm sure.
no, but the way you laid that out was so amazing. So we've got a couple questions that are rolling in here. So
Great.
a few people are wondering what happens to the satellites. So I'm just going to read this question because it sums it up. If GPS satellites are only good for about 10 years, what do they do with the old? Do they destroy them? If so, how? Do they crash to Earth, or could they?
Yes, they could crash to Earth. The majority of them stay within their orbit and then go out into space and become space junk. So that's typically what happens with these. If they have an issue, so it gets to be about 10 years, right? And there's an issue, either an issue with a satellite, or they decide to launch another satellite to replace it in that orbit, they'll deactivate the satellite and it will usually just go out into space and become space junk, unfortunately. So you know that map that I showed of all of the satellites, that doesn't even show all of the space junk that's out there as well, unfortunately.
That's interesting. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
This next question is, how do they ensure the satellites are equally spaced in orbit?
Math. It's all based on math, and it's based on ensuring that the elevation and the timing of those satellites are equally spaced. So when a satellite is launched into orbit, it's locked into where it's supposed to go. So there are human beings who are making those math-based decisions on how to ensure that at specific elevations above the Earth's surface, that once a satellite goes into an orbit, they know the speed that that satellite is going to be traveling at. So you want to make sure that you are equally spacing those. So yeah, it's humans and math. is my best answer on that. It's interesting, you know, that there's so much that goes into these.
Absolutely, and that's all way above my head. Literally.
Nice.
So this next person is wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your educational background, and does every county have this position that you're in? And excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you. Sure, I can talk just a moment about that. So my position as the director of the Office of Geographic Information Systems does not exist at every county. However, I would say at every county and now at a lot of municipalities, there is someone in charge of geographic information systems and digital mapping for the county and sometimes for the municipality. So I got into my position because I'm an artist. My so I went to school for 2 years to become an artist, and then I decided that I wanted to earn a little bit more of a living, and so I got a degree in environmental science. But the reason I bring up art and environmental science is because it led to this left brain, right brain happiness that I'm in with my profession to work in geographic information systems. I did end up getting a master's degree in geographic information systems from the University of Buffalo, by the way. So UB has a great geography and geographic information systems program. So I went to grad school there, and like I said, it really was a good fit for my brain because you need the right brain side of problem solving, creating maps, creating online maps that are readable. You do need some graphic design skills for that, but then you need the analytical side that's interested in technology and problem solving and all of that. So that's how I landed in GIS. And before Erie County, I started my career in about 95, 96, when selective availability was still a thing with GPS units. And I worked in consulting. I worked with Seneca Resources, where we mapped oil and gas wells. We were a petroleum geology company working with National Fuel. From there, I went on to ecology and environment, where I was doing a lot of environmental mapping. And then I taught, I taught this technology at ECC before coming here to the county. So there's my long, short answer.
Oh, thank you for walking us through your journey, Lisa.
Sure.
This next person is wondering, what are the other uses for satellites besides GPS?
Quite a few different uses. So there are military uses that I don't know that much about, but there are a lot of military satellites that are out there that I assume are for tracking and for, I'm just going to say tracking. The additional satellites that I'm aware of are really used for satellite imagery and taking satellite photos. So there are quite a few private companies that are out there that either daily or every 30 days or so will take pictures of the same location for different companies to use and for different government agencies to use. There are also just a slew of satellites that are out there to help manage and maintain these GPS satellites. So there are geostationary ones that are continuously tracking things around the Earth. I guess my long, short answer there too is the majority of the uses for satellites is to keep an eye on things that are going on the Earth.
Okay, thank you. This next question is, since GPS signals cannot be transmitted through water, is there any work being done so that location can be determined underwater?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a huge one. And there are all sorts of different technologies that can work underwater. LiDAR and radar being two of them. So what you can do is, you can get a surface location based on GPS technology. Once you have that, you can enhance that signal and kind of piggyback off that signal for getting depth information. So radar, sonar, and LiDAR are the main ones for getting underwater information. And there's a lot of technology that's being used for locations underwater.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. A couple more questions here, if that's okay.
What was that?
I said we have a couple more questions here, if that's okay.
Yeah. How long do we go
Well, we normally go an hour, if that's okay. So I'll
Okay.
cut you off at 11, I promise.
All right, that's okay. I mean, I've got till lunchtime, so if people are interested, we can keep going.
Okay.
So,
This next one is, do NASA space launches have to navigate through the satellite orbits?
you know, yes, they do, but my understanding is it's almost a non-issue because of how vast and how large that space is. But, as I had shown on that map, the locations of those, and the map I showed was a public map, right? So we don't have like the most detailed information on that public map of satellite orbits. Military and NASA is going to have a lot more detailed information than we have access to. So yes, they do have to navigate and kind of time launches so that they're staying out of that air, much like airplanes have to do with other flights.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
And sticking with space, this person's wondering, is the space station at the same level or higher than the GPS satellites?
That's a good question. And from that map that I shown that would have that information on it, I believe the International Space Station is higher, um, but I'm not positive. So I don't want to give wrong information. But I'm making a note of it because I want to look it up.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
And then the last question I'm seeing is, does your office map the hiking trails within the county parks? If you just want to revisit that for a second, please.
Yes, so yes, I'll revisit it. And my answer to that question is some of them, unfortunately. So here's quick history is that we've never had good GPS hiking trail maps of the parks, mainly because we haven't had the staff to do it. We just got park rangers hired for Erie County parks 2 years ago was when we brought on our first park ranger. So we are desperately in the background trying to get hiking maps going. I is sitting right here at my desk right now. I have a GPS unit that has data for Franklin Golf County Park for the trails that have been mapped on that. And right now we're waiting on me to actually create that map. So we are in the midst of getting hiking trails, good hiking trails, GPS, the signage up for good hiking trails throughout the county parks. And we are completely aware that this needs to get done. I would love to take a couple months and just be the mapper for the Parks Department, and so that we can crank all of that out.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome. Shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay, I've got a few slides now on cell phones and how cell phones determine location, because this really kind of builds on the GPS technology as well. I'd mentioned I'm not as familiar with the cell phone technology. You're going to see my slides are pretty wordy because of that. But we'll go with it and see, like I said, if we can all kind of figure this out together. So cell phones, much like the signals that are coming in from GPS satellites, are based on radio signals and timing, which I thought was very interesting. So your cell phone is really, I mean, at its simplest point, is really nothing more than a sophisticated two-way radio. You've got a radio transmitter and a radio receiver. The difference between cell phones and this GPS technology is the cell phone technology is owned by private companies, right? So you can't just buy a cell phone and be ready to go to use it like you can with a GPS unit. Cell phones are owned by private companies, which means you are going to pay that subscription fee, as I'm sure all of you or most of you are completely aware of. So you can use your cell phone only within a cell service area. So that cell service area is really a communication network where you're where it links to and from end nodes that are wireless, right? So your cell phone is not hooked up to any wires. it's actually transferring a radio signal that's converted to an electrical signal. It's transmitted through these radio waves to the nearest cell tower. And then that radio wave is transferred back to an electrical signal and then back to sound, data, or text, or even video these days again. So that whole system is managed through cell carriers' central offices called mobile telephone switching offices, MTSOs. So these MTSOs are dotted throughout the world now, dotted throughout the United States. They control the operation of cellular systems. So I was mentioning with the GPS units, there are control stations that are set up, dotted throughout the United States. These mobile telephone switching offices are set up to manage signals and manage the cellular system. As you move through these cell networks, your signal, the signal that you're receiving on your cell phone, is either increasing or diminishing all the time. A diminishing signal indicates that it's time to move off to the next cell tower system. So it's all being controlled through these MTSOs. And it's all being controlled almost instantaneously, right? You never notice that this is what's going on between your cell phone trying to hit a cell tower, which is transferring your signal to one of these MTSO offices, which is sending info to another cell tower to your receiver. All right, that's all kind of happening in the background. So let's talk about cell towers. Throughout the United States, there's over 25,000. They're regulated by the FCC. They're not owned by the FCC, right? Cell towers are also privately owned, just as your cell phones are, but they're regulated by the FCC. Is there a map available of those? Always. Yep, and somewhere I've got a map here. I'm going to drag over a map of cell towers in the United States, so we can zoom in on our area. And as I zoom in, you can see this number changes. That number indicates how many towers are in that area. So as I zoom in, that number changes to this red X. And this shows us the cell towers that are in our area. I can click on one, get location details, 4230 or 36 Union Road in Buffalo. There's a cell tower. Okay. I think that's really interesting. And you know, each one of these cells is, the way the cellular network architecture works is towers and base stations, and I've got a picture of a tower here. They're arranged into a network of cells, and they send and receive those radio signals to transmit voice, data, and other content. So if you see this cell tower, you start to notice them if you're driving around. You'll notice that there's different levels on them. They're pointing, they have features that are pointing in different directions. Each level on a cell tower is representing a different network on it. And those networks pay for that space on a cell tower. Okay, so every cell typically uses a different set of frequencies on towers from its neighboring cells to avoid interference. Cellular providers typically don't own cell towers. They usually just lease that space. So multiple cellular providers save money by mounting their antennas onto a commonly shared tower. And again, since these separate systems use different frequencies, their antennas can be located close to one another. So who runs cellular? Like I mentioned, it's all private, right? So this is what we're paying for. Cellular carriers are the ones that are leasing the space, and these are the companies that we pay in order to get cell service. In the United States, cellular carriers, the main ones, Verizon, T-Mobile, the names you've heard of, AT&T, US Cellular. The names you probably haven't heard of are the owners of the cell towers. Again, these are dotted all over the United States, but these companies are the ones that maintain the cell towers and lease the space on them. In the United States, a company called American Tower is the main one, but American Tower, Crown Castle, SBA Communications, might be worth getting stock in some of these companies too. You know, these are really the main players in these cell towers. And the way a cell phone just on its own can pinpoint its location is triangulation. So if your cell phone can pick up 3 individual cell towers or can connect to 3 individual cell towers using triangulation, geometry again, you can find your location within about 300 feet. But again, you have to be able to be within the vicinity of 3 cell towers to do that. Okay. Cell towers can be affected, like you may not be able to get your location due to mountains, due to tall buildings in the area, or even just to the distribution of cell towers. But the average is about 300 feet that you can get your location within. Okay. So comparison of the two technologies, with GPS, you can get really high accuracy, most useful outdoors, actually only useful outdoors, free to use with a GPS receiver, accessible worldwide. Cell phone technology for locations, lower accuracy, but you can use it indoors, right? We can get cell service indoors. Does require the usage, a usage plan, and it's accessible only within a cellular network that you have subscribed to, okay? So the question then becomes, all right, we've got these two technologies. What if we could combine those two technologies and kind of get the best of both worlds? And that is the key to what cell phones are doing these days. Your typical smartphone these days has access to GPS satellites. It has access to cell towers. So it can use GPS. It can use cell towers to find and really hone into a location. Smartphones these days read all of these communication hubs. They have the technology to do that. And then they can also hook up to Wi-Fi. And what Wi-Fi does, this is now another technology that allows devices, Wi-Fi is essentially used so that you can access the internet from your smartphone. But because with Wi-Fi, you can only connect to one network at a time, the signal knows where the location of that Wi-Fi is that you're picking up. So Wi-Fi by default also becomes another indicator of your location. All right, so I'll keep it at that for now. But keep in mind, you purchase a cell phone these days, you now have access to GPS, you have access to cell phone location, you have access to Wi-Fi. All of those things are being used to pinpoint your cell phone location. And now on top of that, other technologies are coming down the pipeline to get an even a more enhanced, accurate location. And I've listed some of them here. Terrestrial transmitters use the same principle as GPS, but instead of using satellites orbiting around the Earth, they're mounted on buildings and cell towers. So very locally, you can pinpoint a user's location with these as close as 2 inches. Your cell phones use inertial sensors so that if you lose connection to a wireless system, and you may have noticed this if you've ever used it like a GPS unit or your phone going through a tunnel, even though you're not getting any signals, it's still being able to map you. It's based on the accelerometer that's in your phone, the gyroscope that's in your phone, and the compass that's in your phone. So these inertial sensors are also tracking your location. And then there's Bluetooth beacons that are being used for very locally precise locations. If you walk into a store, if they have Bluetooth beacons set up in there, it can track your location as close to 10 centimeters. So, all of these technologies are in play in order to get a more accurate location of where your smartphone is. And the reason for it is this. So much is being done with location-based services as sort of a new technology. So this term location-based services, it's really mobile applications that are providing information based on the location of you, the user. So if a store can track your location of where you are within that store, it can pop up information on your phone. It can pop up coupons on your phone. It can show you where the nearest location is of a store that you might be interested in. Travel information, roadside assistance. These location-based services are really the crux of why private companies, in addition to government, in addition to services that would really help you out, like 911 and public safety, why so many different industries and technologies are interested in knowing the location of your phone. So I think it's really important to know that all of this is going on anytime you power up your cell phone. And that's what I've got for you. I didn't go too much over. I know I kind of breezed through the cell phone talk. But that's really the heart of how those different technologies work. The one thing I didn't touch on was like driving directions. And that's really a location-based technology where a private company that has stored every turn in a road provides that service to provides that application on a cell phone or on a GPS unit based on your location. So that's a whole nother private technology location-based service. I could do this for the next 12 hours if you want to keep going. So. But that's what I've got for you for now. I'm happy again to answer any questions that you might have about this or, location-based services, how this works on smartphones.
Oh, Lisa, thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
Holy cow. So I'm seeing thanks, good talk.
Yay.
I'm seeing very interesting, great presentation. I would love to see another presentation on mapping information available through Erie County.
More than willing to do that. We've got a lot going on, and especially with the COVID response, there's been just a whole nother set of maps that we've been doing for testing locations and vaccination rates. So happy to do that.
I think that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
And one person is just wondering, how do you access the Erie County maps for the residential areas and parks? I think those ones you showed in the beginning. You can just give us that website.
Sure. How do I give a website on this?
If you just verbally say it.
Oh, can't do that. It's much too long. Let me see here.
I can open up the chat too, so you can copy and paste if you want. There you go.
That might be easiest. So parks locator map. That's why I didn't want to just say it, but the easiest way to find what maps are available through Erie County is really to Google Erie County, New York GIS or Erie County, New York online maps. And I put the New York in there because we get requests all the time from Erie County, Pennsylvania, where people get confused which is which, and it's really easy even for us to do. So Erie County, New York maps is a good one.
Yep, that is an important distinction. Thank you for mentioning that.
Sure.
Then I'm seeing very informative and interesting. Thanks. This info was fabulous, and the clear
Great.
way it was presented worked really well for me. Thank you.
Yay, that's great to hear because let me tell you, this is very overwhelming as you dive into it. Like I said, I could talk the next 12 hours on how all of this works. And so I tried to provide you with information that was helpful to me when I was trying to figure a lot of this out. So thank you.
Well, Lisa, I appreciate you and all the time you spent putting this together and all your research and for your time today. And to everyone who's on, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.